to large yellow letters IN with blue broken up letters spelling visible underneath make up the logo Invisible. A documentary funded by the British Academy and based on research by Dr. Anica Zeyen, Holloway, University of London, United Kingdom, and Professor Oana Branzei, Ivey Business School, Canada. Directed by Anica Zeyen and Wadeby. New text appears line by line. Over 1 billion people worldwide are disabled. 14.6 million people in the United Kingdom have a disability. 8 out of 10 disabled people have an invisible disability. Fade to black.
Hello, my name is Anica Zeyen. I'm a senior lecturer in entrepreneurship and sustainability at the School of Business and Management at Holloway, University of London in the UK. I specialize in research that looks at the intersection between entrepreneurship and disability. Overall, I'm interested in how to make the world more disability inclusive, of organizing in an inclusive way, and how entrepreneurship can help in that endeavor.
Hello, I'm Oana Branzei. I'm a professor of strategy and sustainability at the Ivey Business School, and my specialty is equity-seeking organizing. I focus on prosocial, therapeutic, place-based, regenerative forms of organizing that help us achieve higher states of well-being at work and in society. The British Academy project, fondly called TEND, examines the range of invisible and visible differences that we all bring to work.
Anica.
We often talk about invisible disabilities, those disabilities that you cannot see by simply looking at a person. Those might be long-term health conditions, mental health disabilities, they might be linked to neurodiversity. What is interesting is that every disability has invisible components. Even those where you think by looking at the person, you know what their disability is. You see they're in a wheelchair. You see they're walking with a cane, walking with a guide dog, might have a hearing dog, so you know they're deaf or hard of hearing. But even that is just at the surface. Most people have multiple layers to the medical side of their disability. So if I even just take myself as an example, I'm blind and a guide dog user. What you don't see, and what I often don't disclose either, are some of the additional challenges, the migraines, the light sensitivity, the dizziness, the nausea that comes with my eye condition. There's a lot of work that goes into being disabled that non-disabled people often don't see and don't even think about. And that's one of the things we really want to highlight with the documentary, is this invisible part to a disability, whether that disability is visible or invisible. From the get-go, there's always invisible stuff that you might not know the person has to deal with.
Jahnavi.
I think the functioning labels are hard to get around. People think I'm high functioning because I can hold a conversation, but there's a lot that goes on underneath, a lot of flapping that is invisible. And being understanding, being a little bit sympathetic, and knowing always that certain things are going to be more difficult for me than they are for them. Just having an awareness of that would make life easier for me. I'm Jahnavi Misra. I live in London, and 2021 was a very eventful year. Of course, there was the pandemic and the anxiety that we all felt, but also my book came out. I got my autism diagnosis. I'm still grappling with that. Trying to get a reference for a job, presenting myself in a certain way in an interview, getting in touch with people like that is very difficult for me. Things like that individuals can't really fix. That's a systemic problem, that certain disabilities are just not looked at.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm 29 and I live in London. I have dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is a motor coordination impairment, and it also has an impact on me in that I find it very difficult to navigate, tell the time, it can be very literal. It's slightly similar to autism, maybe in the same family of neurodiversity, but with an extra spiciness of me not being able to find my way when I'm lost, which is fun.
My name is Kelly, I am 24 and I am the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager for the NHS Lothian Mass Vaccination Programme. I was late diagnosed with autism and ADHD with a sprinkling of dyspraxia as well, so a bit of a mix. I went through a lot of misdiagnosis. I was misdiagnosed 5 times before I finally uncovered the truth myself. Actually, I researched it and found it myself, took it to my doctor and then was diagnosed at the age of 23.
I'm Lucy, I use she, her pronouns. I'm 33, I'm from South London. I'm a quite proud member of the LGBTQI+ community. And I work as a programme officer, which is like a course coordinator of a postgraduate university programme. I've got diagnoses of autism, anxiety and depression, and also technically I've got a borderline personality disorder diagnosis, but I now think that that's inaccurate.
My name's Avril. I'm a councillor for Hampton North Ward, which is where we are now, in the White House Community Centre. I was elected in 2018. I'm also an accredited White Ribbon Champion and I'm serving my 3rd term on the Safer Neighbourhood Board representing business. I'm currently an independent counsellor. I work in retail management for a company which helps people with their health and well-being. And yeah, I live alone and I love what I do. I love helping people, giving them the right advice to sort their problems out. White Ribbon UK started over 30 years ago. And it's a global campaign. It tackles gender-based violence against women and girls, and people can commit to making the White Ribbon Promise on the White Ribbon website, and that commitment means that they won't look the other way and they won't tolerate any violence towards women when they see it, and they'll call it out. I've got a really rare condition recognised by NORD called Parry-Romberg syndrome. It's also known as Parry-Romberg's disease, but you can't catch it off me, so don't worry. And it's got 3 main symptoms, one of which is a recognised disability in itself, which is epilepsy. I've also got 3 worn vertebrae in my spine, which causes chronic pain in those areas. And I've also got muscle spasms in my jaw, so I have to have that paralysed every 3 to 5 months with injections in my temporalis, which is sort of up here, and a masseter here, and it's my epilepsy consultant that does that. And thankfully I only have to go to 1 hospital now for that, because the hospital that I used to see him for my epilepsy has now got that in their budget, so I don't have to go to 2 different hospitals for it.
Hi, I'm Hannah and I'm 31. I'm a power chair user. I have several illnesses: complex regional pain syndrome, spasms, functional neurological disorder, hypermobility syndrome, osteoporosis and a plated femur. When I was 14, I had an injury playing netball and I damaged my ankle and the nerves in my ankle, which caused the complex regional pain syndrome. And then kind of things spread from like one leg up my leg to the other leg, and then caused some of the other illnesses as secondary complications. Initially, I don't think I realised that it was more of a long-term disability. I felt like I was sort of had an injury and hopefully I was going to recover and then get back to kind of normal life. But then after quite a few years of having the injury and spending several years in hospital, I realised that actually, you know, it is more of a long-term disability that I'm living with.
Anica.
As a business school scholar, one of the things I notice when I go to conferences, whether they're practitioner-based conferences, academic conferences, or mix, is that disability is often not talked about when we talk about EDI, so equality, diversity, and inclusion. We talk about race, gender, LGBTQ, lots of other issues, which are highly important, but we don't talk about disability, even though we're talking about 1 billion people worldwide. And in the UK, it's 15% of the population. In the United States, we're talking 25% of the population. So it's not a small group, but we just don't talk about them. Moving from making it an invisible characteristic that people have to more visible will change the discussions about diversity and inclusion. Because if you make things more inclusive for disabled people, it usually is more inclusive to everyone else.
Oana.
This intersection of disability with any other intersectionalities in our lives, gender, race, class, makes the disrespect so much more endemic and makes the work needed to achieve even basic respect so much more ominous and onerous for a person identifying with any disability. This boundary between respect and disrespect matters greatly to all of us, but we often don't appreciate the amount of work required to turn the disrespect into respect. One of the key insights of our work has been the notion of sacrifice, how so many workers with disability throughout the pandemic repeatedly put their bodies on the line to gain respect. Moments of respect were hard-earned by the participants in our sample, because in a time of pandemic, it was also a call for action. And we have heard so many times that people living with disability were ready for this because they have encountered so many barriers of access before, because they had to figure out so many workarounds and accommodations. And therefore, they were much more resourceful, even down to the work their bodies do to accommodate to the pandemic.
Jess.
A lot of neurodivergent people operate at a fairly high level of stress and have to hide their anxiety, and it's exhausting. I don't know that many people will have had to learn systematically the kind of coping mechanisms I need to get through an ordinary day. And that's a really sharp learning curve. You don't want to learn how to swim when you've been chucked into the water. So I really felt for people who are experiencing deep anxiety for the first time in their lives, in the middle of one of the objectively most scary things anyone's had to face. And that was really hard to witness. I was very anxious as well, and I'd had lots of counselling and various kinds of occupational therapy, and dyspraxia meant that I was very fond of being indoors. I was already really into D&D, I already loved reading, I already loved embroidery. So I already had lots of hobbies ready to go. I was sitting still in the quiet for hours and hours and hours on end. And all of a sudden, all the stuff that I keep busy to avoid thinking about started bubbling up to the surface. Like, what are you doing with your life, Jessica? Are you the person you want to be? And normally at that point, I would go and do something to distract myself. But no, I had to sit down and really think about whether or not I was living the life I wanted to live. And if I died at the end of the month, will I be satisfied with what I've done? And so I cut off toxic family members, moved house, got engaged, and started looking for a new job.
A montage of Jess and her wife playing the piano and cooking lunch together. Hannah playing the keyboard.
When I was a teenager, I used to play the keyboard, and I didn't get very far, only like to grade 1 or something. I think like most people, we had to clear out of the loft during lockdown. I have been kind of reteaching myself how to play the keyboard. Having a disability has definitely prepared me more for managing with the pandemic than if I hadn't had a disability. As a teenager, I spent 4 years in hospital, 3.5 years of which I was totally bedbound, and I couldn't go out in the world at all. So actually like a couple of weeks or a couple of months being in my house, being able to access the whole of the ground floor, being able to go in the garden, I didn't find very restrictive at all. A lot of disabled people have had maybe a time during their life when they've had to either been on bed rest or there's been a time they haven't been able to go out. So they've been prepared, they've got those skills to deal with that better than somebody who's not gone through something like that.
Jahnavi.
I did not need the kind of external structure that a lot of my friends needed and complained about not having during the pandemic. I did not feel that lack so much. I don't feel so bad about being isolated and not being able to meet people as much. I think that was very difficult for people during the pandemic.
Avril.
Lots of disabled people were already used to having that isolation, doing things with little or no support on their own, and made them more resilient than other people. Disabled people are better at adapting because disabled people develop coping mechanisms to get around the barriers that they face depending on their specific disability. When COVID happened, lots of people were suddenly facing all these barriers that they've never come across. Disabled people were quicker to adapt than other people.
Kelly.
I think disabled people generally are resilient because we have to be. We are hardwired to be resilient because the world was not built for us, and there is very little effort made to include us, and that comes with its challenges. So I think when you are a disabled person living in a very much non-disabled world, when we're presented with crises, we probably do adapt a little bit better.
Lucy.
I don't think that my disability prepared me for the pandemic at all. I think that it was the problem. I think if I didn't have such high levels of anxiety, if I didn't struggle with health anxiety, if I wasn't a self-harmer, if I didn't struggle with some of the things that come along with autism so much, like change and a lack of routine and clarity, then I think it would have been an entirely different experience.
Jess.
I remember a colleague of mine left a post-it note on my locker, and I kept it on the fridge for weeks because it was the first person I'd spoken to, even via post-it note, who wasn't in my household, and it meant a lot to me.
Anica.
The decision to disclose a disability is one that many disabled people struggle with. In today's Zoom-based world, might be quite happily hiding the fact that they're wheelchair users because we only see from the shoulders up.
And how do people respond to it?
Hannah.
Friends and family that knew me before my disability, they treat me kind of the same. I'm still Hannah. And that's what I really like to say to people, like, yes, okay, I can't walk now, or I have, severe pain and symptoms and things. Things are more difficult for me and challenging. I need personal assistance, but I'm still Hannah. I'm still a person, which I think is something that maybe people who haven't met me before and then are kind of just getting to know me as Hannah later on, it's like, oh, Hannah, the girl in the wheelchair, whereas I'm not just the girl in the wheelchair or the woman in the wheelchair. I have a personality, but I happen to also need a wheelchair to enable me to have a good quality of life. People assume if you're a wheelchair user that your brain doesn't work, that mentally you're not as able. I think people don't realise that actually they still want to achieve, like maybe getting married, having children, buying a house, going on holiday, all these kind of dreams and hopes that an able person wants to achieve, disabled people also have. We're not stupid.
Lucy.
A lot of people misunderstand how autism presents outside of the stereotypical white male boy playing just with trains and being good at maths and having really big issues with communication and socialising, and especially how it presents in, I won't say just women, but people who don't present as cis males.
Kelly.
I actually had a particularly grim experience with an ex-employer, and at the time I wasn't diagnosed. I have since been diagnosed, and I've been told repeatedly that they don't agree that that is my diagnosis. They don't agree that's what's wrong. They think that I have anxiety. Not that they are qualified in any means to make those assertions, but being met with that ignorance has been really challenging, and it was actually very difficult to swallow in a way that surprised me, because I thought, I've been through a lot in the last 10 years. I thought that I could kind of handle anything, and that was a big kick in the teeth for me, because I fought very tenaciously for this diagnosis, and I threw everything at it, and I knew that that's what it was. And to be told point blank, that's not what it is, you're making that up, and to be gaslit like that was very triggering and took a lot of unpacking. And I'm under no illusions. I absolutely think that I'm going to be up against this for the rest of my life. And in that job, I worked in the equality unit of that business. So for me, that was kind of like, well, if they can't get it right, who is going to get it right?
Anica.
Many had been asking for remote working for years, always told it's impossible. You can't work from home all the time. You have to be in the office. You have to physically come to work. And then suddenly, when the 80% of the population that are non-disabled needed it, it was possible overnight.
Avril.
So many employers had previously said, sorry, but you can't work from home, or you won't be able to do this job, and maybe people had been discriminated against and not given the job, even though they were qualified for the job. And then all of a sudden employers didn't want to lose their staff, and so they did everything they can to get as many staff as possible, not on furlough, but working from home. And that's something that I think should stay, but my worry is that that's starting to now taper off and things are starting to return to as they were before.
Anica.
It is this frustration sometimes that if you ask because of your disability, it might be a no. If you ask as a non-disabled person, you might get a yes. But with the disclosure, it is this fear always that you're one of the only ones, that others will not understand. So seeing role models, seeing representation makes such a difference. And we talk about that so much when it comes to other intersectional identities. We talk about the importance of having women in leadership position to help women understand that that's a possibility, to have people of color in leadership positions, to have openly gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender individuals in those positions. And we need the same for disability. We need to have those people representing the community so that others feel they can be open about it and also achieve whatever their life streams are. All our protagonists who were brave and courageous enough to be in front of the camera told us they're doing so because they would have wanted to see someone that looks like them when they were younger.
Kelly.
I think my mission in all of this is to raise awareness, to put myself in front of other people who are maybe going through the same things that I went through, who are also maybe sleeping in their cars because they're ostracized from their friends and family, and who don't know what's wrong and who are desperately seeking answers that they just don't have. And if I had been presented with this, with someone like me much sooner in my life, I would have made the connection. And I think it's very important that we get that message to young people, to young women who are struggling and who don't have the answers and who are being let down by services. Because, like I say, having that influence for me would have changed a lot and would have got me my diagnosis much earlier.
Jess.
I thought, I wonder how many black queer women are going to be doing this. I remember when I was a kid, I couldn't imagine at all what it would look like for me to be loved, because there were no main characters in books or movies who looked at all like me. I couldn't imagine what a marriage between two women would be like, and I did want that. I couldn't imagine an image of myself as an adult with all of the challenges I have being happy at all. And that was a huge part of my depression, like looking into the future and just seeing nothing. Thinking that I was only ever going to be a burden, that I could never bring anything good into the world, that this world was not made for me and I wasn't really meant to be here, and that everybody I loved was apparently happy to buy into that system. Right up until the moment where I told them how unhappy it made me. So I wanted to do this because I hope that anyone who's wondering if they're alone feels less alone. And I hope that, I don't know how to describe it. Like, I think if I'd been able to see or feel a part of a community and see really, or experience really what a possible future was like, I would have felt more able to dream for a future of myself. So I hope I can help that happen.
Avril.
People need to check their own conscious and unconscious bias when they're interacting with people with disabilities. Break the bias.
Lucy.
After having people come to me and say that they found me sharing my experiences validating and helpful, and gave them more bravery to share what they'd experienced. This was just doing the same thing but on a wider scale.
Fade to black. Text appears. According to the Office for National Statistics, 6 out of 10 people who died of COVID-19 during the first year of the pandemic were disabled. New text appears. While more disabled people have entered the workforce, there is still a big employment gap between non-disabled and disabled adults. For some, finding work takes years. 22 out of 100 autistic adults are in some form of paid work. New text appears. The social model of disability tells us that inaccessibility, stigma, prejudice, and other forms of exclusion are the cause of disability. New text appears. Stigma and prejudice survive because we let it. We need to be aware of the invisible. Let's work together to make society and the workplace inclusive for everyone. New text appears. What can you do to make the invisible visible? Credits rolling. Directed by Anica Zeyen and Wade. Edited by Brendan Eddie Wade. Cinematography Alex Rudzkowska and Brendan Wade. Colorist Alex Rudzkowska. Audio description written and read by Anica Zeyen. Production assistant Emilia Costales and Luke Coughlin. Captions Emilia Costales. Protagonist Oana Branzei, Avril Coelho, Hannah Deakin, Jess, Callie Given, Lucy Matthews, Jahnavi Misra, Anica Zeyen. Logo design by Andy Carter, illustrator, funded by British Academy. Music Cycled by Mark Jackson Burrows, produced by Audio Network. Animate by Richard Lacey, produced by Audio Network. Fjord by David Tobin, Jeff Megan, Malcolm Edmonston, produced by Audio Network. Say It Too by Phil Penton, Tom Barnes, Oliver Wilde, produced by Audio Network. Solitary Journey by Cliff Masterson, produced by Audio Network. Desolate Beauty by Richard Lacey, produced by Audio Network. Collecting Memories by Richard Lacey, produced by Audio Network. Beyond the Cloud by David Kelly, produced by Audio Network. Copyright 2022, .51 Productions and Anica Zeyen. All rights reserved.